All right. All right, why don't we get started? So yeah, Kat, Tucker, Sean, who's also comes every now and then, been checking out your guys' projects. Very cool stuff. Very cool. Was yours in Rails too?
No.
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 What was it in?
We just used JavaScript.
Okay.
Our demo.
Yeah. Very cool.
Our demo was very like smoke and mirrors.
That's all you need. Get the funding and go from there.
Oh yeah, it was a lot of JavaScript, and we just had like we had it animate you getting new like posts in your feed and them dropping down. It was pretty funny.
Cool.
It was good.
Yeah, it's again, if it worked, it worked.
Yeah.
Sorry, Ryan's good. Screen share, that's good. Yeah. Okay, sweet. Okay, yeah. So I guess I'm a little self-deprecating that way. I'm always surprised when students leave the class and actually continue to use Rails. So very cool stuff. Yeah. So yours was a social network aggregator.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then Tucker's was. Do you remember what Tucker's? Yeah. So it's kind of like rate your landlord, which is very cool. And then Sean is working. He's working on a app for, I think, Ottawa Jazz Festival, which is pretty cool, like for volunteering for that. So very, very cool stuff. If there's one piece of advice that I can give you guys on writing your own apps, is that if the idea already exists in the market, who cares? Like, do it anyways. Like you will learn like so much, right? Like if you're like, hey, I want to create, or rate my prop, and people are like, well, that already exists. It's like, well, who cares? Like you'll learn so much by doing it. You'll probably find interesting ways to do it yourself anyways, and you might make it even better. So, okay, so today it's all about kind of wrapping up your app in a nice package. Basically what I'd like to do today is basically most of the lecture we're going to be putting some authorization and authentication around your app. And the reason that it is like, well, if you launch your app today, there is no protection against anything, right? Like anybody can edit blog posts, anybody can create new ones, and anyone can destroy it. So that's one of the keys to start to show this to people, right? If you want to post this on a public web server, that's one of the biggest things is that you want to protect yourself, right, against that. So we'll be using a library called Devise, which in itself, like learning to use it, we'll be getting into what gems are and what we've been doing with Bundle. We'll get into our first active record association. It's kind of unfortunate actually that I don't have time to go into the other active record associations, because this is actually one of the less common ones, and it's kind of logically one of the more complicated ones to learn. But it is necessary for what we're going to be doing. And then after that, I want to kind of package the app up a little bit, because now it looks really crappy. It looks awful. I want to do just a tiny bit of CSS, tiny bit of layout work, tiny bit of views, kind of do all that to package it up so that you are actually semi-proud of showing this to your friends. I mean, that's one of the coolest things about web. It is one of those things where you can deploy it and then you can say, hey, pull up your iPhone and bring it up. So that's kind of what we're going to focus on today. If by some miracle we get through all that early, then we'll start our JavaScript talk at that point. I don't think we'll get to that point, but we'll see. So our focus will be authentication and authorization. After that, a little bit of CSS. Nothing that you haven't seen before. But again, it's nice to, I mean, you guys probably leave this class and don't have time to really work on this at home. So it's nice to kind of use this class time to actually get that done. And then we'll go from there. Okay, so let's talk about Devise. So I mentioned this last week and the week before, that a lot of Rails courses teach their own authentication and authorization. So basically the difference between authentication and authorization, by the way, authentication, I mean, you'll read the text that says, oh, it's identifying a person as who they claim to be, and authorization is protecting your app. Basically what that means is authentication is your login process, okay? That you're basically identifying somebody given a username and password. If someone provides a correct username and password, then you say, okay, I trust any requests coming from that session to be from the person that they claim to be. And then authorization is your code to say, block certain things from happening. So if they're not an administrator, don't do this. If they're not a signed-in user, don't do this and that, okay? That's what authorization is. They kind of go hand in hand because you'd probably very rarely implement authentication and then not do anything with it, right? It'd be weird to have a sign-in process and then not actually act on, say, okay, well, if they're signed in or if they're not signed in or if they're an admin or not they're an admin, right? So they kind of go hand in hand. And really, you can't have authorization without authentication because who are you authorizing, right? If you have no way of identifying who the user is, you can't say block this person from doing this, right? So that's why they kind of go hand in hand. Why we always teach together. And again, like the very first Rails tutorial I taught you how to do this from scratch. There are other Rails courses in Ottawa that teach you how to do this from scratch. Unfortunately, I don't have the time to teach it from scratch. But it is a good exercise for you guys to go about if you want to learn how to do that. Now, if you are looking for a tutorial on how to do this from scratch, on the official Ruby on Rails website, the Getting Started section, I haven't been here in a while, so hopefully it's still there. Okay, cool. Yeah, so the Getting Started brings you to, does it forward you to? Oh, it's a little further then. Right. Oh, actually, even before that. Do they have a link to Michael Hartle's tutorial? Okay, if they don't, there's a really great tutorial that I haven't checked out in a long time, but I know he keeps it up to date, Michael Hartle. This tutorial here, I haven't checked it in a while, but last time I checked it, he did go through building your own authentication system. Now, this gets more and more abstracted with each version of Rails, but again, he still walks you through it, which is really nice. And this is a free book. At least the online version is free. Hopefully, it's still free. Yeah. Okay, and then you can again follow that. So it's a really good tutorial. So we are going to use a library that handles all this. Now, this is a pretty complex library and can do a lot of stuff for you. Okay, the library can do a whole whack of things for you, but we are going to use it in its most basic form. Okay, we're going to use it in basically allow a user to sign up, and then we're going to create our own implementation for roles. Okay, for admins and non-admins, and that's really all we're going to do. So we're going to let registration be completely wide open, so anybody could randomly sign up for your site, but we are going to control administration access, okay? So someone could sign up and really get nowhere with it, but we'll go from there, okay? So here's what we're going to do. Actually, not before we do that. We should do this as we go along. Okay, so what we're going to do is, the very first thing we're going to do is what I told you guys to do last week. So if you open up your Sublime projects, okay, last week I told you guys to install the gem Devise. Now, I told you to do this, and I've never really gone over what the gem file is. Okay, how many people here have programmed in Java before? Okay, most of you guys, okay. Hopefully you guys are familiar with jar files, right? Jar files are a way to package up, a lot of times, a way to package up Java libraries. I mean, you can package up Java executables as well, but a lot of times it's just a package of Java libraries, right? And what are Java libraries? They're just usually a collection of classes, interfaces, you know, snippets of code that people have coded already so that you don't have to recode them, right? And usually the way you do that is you include that jar file in your project, and then you basically specify, you're using like Eclipse or something, how to compile that code, right? So that library is referenced in your code. Gem file is very similar, okay? Again, I haven't touched Java library management in a long time, so I don't know how far it's come along. Gem file is a really nice way to do this, and gems are basically like jar files. Okay, gem is a agreed upon way to package up Ruby code into a package that you can download from the internet. Okay, the really nice thing is they have a standard place to go. This https://rubygems.org. Okay, that is a place where you can download gems, but you can download gems from anywhere you want. Okay, and the specification in this gem file gets very complex. There's a whole a lot of documentation on how this file actually works. But long story short, you can put a gem in here that your application depends on, and then you just use the bundle command to download that gem into your library, okay? So this is really a quick way in Rails to download external libraries, okay? Now, bundle itself is a gem manager, Okay, so you can actually manually install gems by using gem install. Okay, so Ruby natively ships with a command called gem install. And you can install something like gem install Rails. You probably remember us doing this way back when we were setting up Ruby on Rails for the first time. Okay, because Rails is actually distributed as a Ruby gem. Okay, but somebody created a program called Bundle that allows you to say, well, rather than me doing gem install this, gem install this, gem install this, gem install this, all right, Bundler basically says, give me your whole list and I'll download that for you. Okay. Again, there's a lot of documentation about this and how to specify like different versions, and how it works when you do bundle update and all this stuff like that. But basically, the way you can look at this right now is when you put a gem in here, you do bundle, it'll download that into your Ruby runtime. Okay. The one thing that may be a little bit of a gotcha is that gems are installed into your Ruby runtime. Okay, that means whenever you run bundle and it starts to install these gems like Rails, SQLite 3, SAS Rails, Fire, stuff like that, it's going to put those libraries into wherever your Ruby's installed. Okay, and if you have a package manager like RVM, stuff like that, it'll manage that per Ruby. But basically, what the thing to know about that is that when you are installing gems from other like projects and stuff like that, they all go into your runtime. Okay, and then what happens is they may overwrite old ones, this and that. That's why package managers like RVM allow you to separate all your gem management. Okay. All right. So if you weren't here last couple of weeks, just make sure you have gem devise, and then in your command line at your root, just run bundle. Bundle is just short for bundle install. It's the default command. Okay. Now, if it's already downloaded, you'll see that all it does is say using. That means these gems are already been downloaded into your Ruby runtime, and there's nothing else to download, and it's just using all those gems. Okay? So now Devise is ready for us to use. Okay? Now gems, again, they come in all different types. They come in all different flavors. Okay? Gems may contain Ruby code. They may even include just JavaScript code or CSS. They may include generators. Okay, you know how we were using generators to generate scaffold, generate models, things like that. They may come with custom generators, custom rake tasks. It's up to the developer. Okay, like Ruby gem developers can basically put whatever they want in their gems. The only gem I've ever developed only had CSS and JavaScript in it. It didn't actually have Ruby code in it. Okay, so you can basically do whatever you want with that. Devise itself comes with a couple things. It comes with classes. I believe it comes with what's called a Rails engine. And it also comes with generators as well. Okay, so there's a couple steps we're going to take to actually get Devise up and running, but they're actually pretty simple. Okay, now this is all on my PowerPoint slides, or Google Drive slides, I guess. So the very first thing we did is install the gem. Okay, so gem Devise, and then just do a bundle. And then we're going to use this custom generator. Okay. Rails generators always start with Rails G or Rails generate. Okay, so if we go to our generator here and you have Devise installed, what you're going to run is you're going to run Rails G Devise, okay, :install, all lowercase, no spaces. Okay, Rails generate Devise install. Not going to do a whole lot. You'll see what it does when you hit enter. It's going to do very little and then spit out a whole bunch of instructions for you. Okay? Like this seems like a lot of stuff, but these are just instructions. What it actually did is it just created these two files here. Okay? It created a config initializers devise.rb and config locales devise.en.yaml. Okay? Let's take a look at those files quickly. So if you go back to your project and do Command P or Control P in Windows and search for devise.rb. Okay? There's a lot of comments here. All right, for different ways to configure how Devise is going to run. Okay, but basically this sets up Devise in the default way for your application. Okay, in case you're curious, this is under config initializers. Config initializers is generally where you put Ruby code that you want to run as soon as your server starts up. Okay, any custom code that you want. A lot of libraries do that. Okay, so if, for example, password length, if you want to set that, you can set it here. A lot of configuration you can do here. And I think even, yeah, oh yeah, they've changed how the secret key works. It used to be that the secret key was in here and kept your app, the authentication that you use for your app would be different from any other app. I don't know how they've done that now. Okay, but this is basically files that you need for Devise to run. Okay, so Rails generate, Devise install. Okay, then it runs you through a couple of steps that you need to take care of to get this up and running. Okay, now you technically don't need to do all these, but if you don't do them all, certain things will break. And I will pick and choose what we're going to do in this class. Okay, so the first one is they say configure your action mailer default URL options. I'm going to tell you right now, we're not going to do that. What this is basically if you configure your app to send out emails, okay, that piece of the code doesn't have access to things like your host. Okay, so if you were to say something like, send an email out, and it said, click here to sign in, and it'd be a link to your web page, right? You don't have access to the host there, so you configure the host here, and you can use that in your emails that you send out. Okay, we're not going to be dealing with emails for Devise here, so you don't really need to configure that. The second thing we need to do is make sure we have a root. Okay, make sure we have a root path, and we do. I believe we do. Yeah, we have a root pages home. Okay. Why you have to configure that is when there's a couple of things, right? When you click log out using Devise, where is it going to forward to? It's going to forward to the root. If you are unauthorized to hit certain parts of the site, by default, I believe it redirects to route. Things like root. That's some of the things that Devise needs. So if you don't have a root, it doesn't know where to go. These alert notices are also not strictly necessary. What these are is in case. I never introduced you guys to a very common thing called Flash. It's basically a way for you to store a message and then display that. So, like say for example, you updated a blog post and you want to display a message, blog post successfully updated. Or if there's an error and say blog post could not be updated, little messages like that. There's a standard way to do that in Rails called Flash. We didn't cover it. Devise uses those Flash messages as well for things like this. So if you sign in, it's like signed in successfully. You want to flash that message. Or you're not authorized to view this page. Things like that, okay? So they recommend that you put that piece of code somewhere in your template so that that Flash message will actually be shown. It'll actually be shown in your website, okay? We're not going to do that. We're going to skip that as well. If you're deploying to Heroku, which again, I don't know if we'll get to in this class, you have to set this. I don't know why this is in Devise, to be honest. This is like a Heroku setup thing. I don't know why they put it in Devise there. And then the last thing is if you want to customize the view. So if you want to change how the login page looks and how the sign up page looks and how the forgot password page looks, you run that command there. So really, the only thing you really need to do for all this to get a bare minimum to work is make sure you have a root, and we've done that already. So we're pretty much set up for Devise to work. Okay. So what did we do? We installed the gem. We ran the initializer. Okay. Now we have to create a model. Okay. So think about this. Like if we are going to manage users, okay, user accounts, we need to store them in the database. Now, remember in the past we did this with blog or news posts, right? We did a Rails generate model, and then we generated a controller to manage that model, and we built our whole RESTful resource, right? You could do that here as well. Devise, you could create a user that has an email, that has a password, that has maybe we don't want to store the password, maybe store the encrypted password, has a hash key, stuff like that. Again, when you study how to create your own authentication system, all these fields will start to make sense. What you need to know is that Devise has built this in for you already. Okay, they say, we can generate that model for you, just tell us what the name of that model is going to be. Because maybe you don't want to use user. Maybe you want to use accounts instead of user, right? Or user accounts or something like that, right? So Devise says, we'll create all the necessary fields that we need to do our authentication, okay? As long as you just tell us what the name of that model is, and we'll generate that model for you, okay? So the next step we're going to do is Rails G Devise user. That ultimately breaks down into Rails generate model user, and then all the Devise fields that it needs. Okay, that's all we're really doing. Devise has shortcutted this for us, okay? So it's no different than creating our own model with all those specified fields, okay? So we're going to do Rails generate Devise user, okay? No colon and a space here, okay? So Rails generate Devise user. All right, when you hit enter, it should generate a migration, okay? So it's generated, actually it's generated a model for us as well, Okay, so again, remember when we did Rails generate model? That created the model file and the migration. Same thing here, right? So it created the model file for us, and then it's also created a migration for us. Okay, so let's take a look at that migration. So if you go to your app, DB migrate, there's our news post migration. There's our products migration at the last few minutes of class last week when we did a scaffold. And now here's the users creation. Okay, so you see what it's doing? It's creating a table just like these other ones are doing. And again, it's creating an email, an encrypted password, reset password token, remember created at, all these fields that Devise needs to store on a user account. Okay, so I mean, reset password token, if you ever go to a website and say, I forgot my password, the way that works is they randomly generate a token, store it against your account, and then when you get that email, you're basically going to a link that has that token. And they say, does that token match the token that we created for this person? Yes, allow this person to reset their password, right? If the token doesn't match, I mean, some malicious person is going to that site, right? They don't have access to that token, right? So things like that is what it's creating, okay? So now that we have a migration, all we have to do is do rake db migrate to run that migration, okay? And remember, this rake db migrate is a very smart tool. It knows what migrations is run already versus what migrations need to be run. Okay, so that's run now. So it's created the table users, it's added an index, and that's what that migration did. Okay. And now I think we're pretty much ready to go. So if you fire up your Rails server, let's see. Okay, so if you file up your Rails server, you go to your root, okay, you still have that old homepage. Again, this is the kind of stuff I want to clean up towards the end of class. Okay. And now you have some new paths that Devise has given you. Okay. In fact, if we're smart from last week, it should work. Yeah, okay. So remember how I said at any point, if you want to check what routes are on your app, you can do rake routes, right? And the reason we do that is because we have a lot of shortcut language, right? So for example, in our routes, we have resources products and resources news posts. Well, what routes does that actually amount to, right? When you type rake routes, it actually spits the whole thing out for you, right? So here's all the product routes, right? Here's all the news post routes, okay? And then libraries themselves, like Devise, add their own routes, okay? So look, Devise has added all this. Okay, this is how Devise manages signing up, okay, signing in, signing out. All this stuff is managed right there, okay? It's kind of interesting. The first time I learned Rails, they taught this idea. Remember how I said in Rails, you want to structure as much of your app around the idea of RESTful resources, resources that can be created, destroyed, updated, deleted, and so on and so forth, right? Well, most authentication systems manage your session like a RESTful resource. Okay, so you're creating a session, you're destroying a session, things like that. So it's pretty cool how they adopt that same pattern. Okay, so here's all those routes there, all right, and we can actually go to those routes. So you see here, there's users sign up, there's users sign in, and so on and so forth. So let's check out one of these. Okay, so if I go to my local host and go users sign _ in, there we go. Okay, there's a view that was created for us. Okay. So again, this is built into the Devise engine, the Devise library. Okay. And if you click on sign up, you're brought to the sign up page. Okay. If you click on forgot your password, you're brought to the forgot your password page. Now here's a good example. Actually, we don't have mail set up, so forgot your password is not going to work. Forgot your password sends an email out to somebody, so this piece is not going to work on your site. Okay. But you can do all this kind of stuff. Okay. All right, so while we're doing this, it'd be nice if while we're at the home page, just to have a little navigation so we can sign in, sign out, and stuff like that. Okay, so let's just quickly add that. So if we go to our application layout, so again, if you don't know where that is, it's under App Views Layouts Application. Okay, again, Sublime, you can always just do Command P or Control P, start typing it, and you'll find it. Okay, so here's our application here. All right, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put in a header. Actually, let's make that an ID. And then here, inside the header, I'm going to have some navigation. You could also use HTML5 tags here if you want. You could use header tags and nav tags. I'm just going to make this really simple right now. Okay, navigation. And then here I'm just going to put some links. Okay, so I'm going to put a link for home. I'm going to put a link to news posts. And then a link to sign in. I think we can use user sign-in path or new user session path. Okay, so here we go. Let's put that in a container as well. Okay, so we have at least a little navigation at the top here. Okay, so home, news post, sign in. Home, news posts, and sign in. Okay, looking more like a website now. Okay, so there we go. And now we can actually just use this. We can use this to sign up. Okay, so here we put in kclee@gmail.com, give a password, log in. Okay. Oh, whoops. Log in. Okay, so this is where, like, why Devise gives you instructions to say, like, put your notice. Because there's a flash notice there that says, you know, invalid password and username. But I didn't see it because I don't have anywhere on my site that actually puts that. Okay, so that might be a good winning case to put that in. But I'm trying to rush through this. All right, so in that case, I tried to log in with my username and password. I don't have a username and password yet, so that's why that login didn't work. So let's just go to sign up. Okay, so I'm going to go sign up. Okay, and now I'm signed in. Okay, I have no way of knowing that. Okay, but I am signed in. All right, so we have an account here. We created it. Once you logged in, it's signed in, and notice it redirected to the root path. That's why you have to specify a root path. Okay, so let's create some visual indicator of us being signed in or not signed in. Okay, I'm going to choose the easiest version of this, which is if you're signed in, show a sign out link. If you're not signed in, show a sign in link. Okay, you can do this with colors. You can do this with whatever you want. Okay, but I'm going to choose the easiest version, which is right here. If the person signed in, show a sign out link. Otherwise, show a sign in link. Okay, so along with Devise's generators, along with Devise's their views and their all the logic to sign in, sign out, all the stuff for that. They also give you some view helpers. Okay, we've used some built-in view helpers like link to, yield. We didn't type them in, but JavaScript include that. These are all view helpers. Okay, so they're methods that output something or do some control flow to your app. Okay, so we're going to use some that come built in with Devise. Okay. So I've also noted this in the slides here. Okay, you have things like user signed in. Okay, that's a Boolean variable, Boolean method. Sorry, that you can reference anywhere in your views. You have access to something called the current user all throughout your code. Okay, because you use this Devise gem, now you can reference current user. You can check if it's nil. You can check any values on it. What's the email address? All this. Okay, and then authenticate user we actually won't use, but we'll get into what we're going to do with authorization after this, okay? But the first two are very useful, okay? User signed in and current user. So all we have to do here, okay, is we say if the user is signed in, okay? Again, this is just a method that Devise gives you, okay? And it spits out true or false. If they are signed in, else do something else, okay? So if they're not signed in, we will show that sign-in link. If they are signed in, we'll do a sign-out link. Okay, I'll have to look up where that actually goes to in a second, but let's see if this is working first. Okay, now remember, this is in our application.html.erb. So this is on every page request, right? This is going to render. So if I refresh the page, you'll see now I have a sign out there. Okay, it doesn't do anything yet because we haven't implemented that. But because I'm signed in, it's there. Okay, so let's actually implement that. I believe that goes to, let's see here, the destroy user session path with a method of delete. So let's see how this looks. So go to this destroy user session path. Okay. And it needs a method of delete. And the way you do that on links is you pass in a data hash with the method delete. Okay, so the way to read this is a hash that's assigned to data. And then inside that hash, you have another hash, method delete. I think that should do it. I refresh the page when I hit sign out. Okay, that actually signed me out, and you can see it changed to sign in. Okay. So again, when I go to sign in, oops. See, now it's a sign out. More commonly, you guys are probably used to, like, on Twitter and Gmail, Facebook, stuff like that. When you're signed in, they actually show your, like, email address or your user account or your avatar or whatever, right? So why don't we add that little bit of flair to this? Let's actually show what user was signed in as, okay? Especially when you're a developer, you're going to be having a lot of different roles, a lot of different email addresses. It's a lot easier to know what account you're actually signed in as, okay? So here, instead of just putting sign out, let's put sign out, and let's put the actual user's email address in here, okay? So we have access to the current user, so we just say current user. Okay. Now again, current user references whatever your model is. Okay, so our model is a user, but if your model was user account, if your model was just account or whatever, it references that. Okay, so current user, and again, it has an email field on it, so we can just do email. Okay, so sign out casey.lee@gmail.com. Okay. So now you can tell if somebody's signed in or if somebody is not signed in. Okay. So that's some good stuff. I mean, there's some stuff you may want publicly open to people who are just signed in, okay? But there's some stuff that you probably want to restrict even further than that, and that's where we're going to introduce the idea of administrator access, okay? And other roles too, actually, if we want, okay? So, yeah, because what we're going to do is we're going to leave this wide open to anybody who wants to sign up, okay? You can do things like, you know, disable registration so that you just have one user account and no one else can sign up. You can do stuff like that. I like to take the other approach because, one, I've been doing it like a lot, so it's just something I'm familiar with. But two, also, this leaves it open to, like, if you do actually want user accounts in the future, where people comment on your blog posts, you want to create some kind of community. It's very common to have a user account sign up on your website, right? So it leaves it open to that without having to do too much there, okay? So how do we do this? This is a bit of a convoluted route to go about it, but I've used it a lot, and I feel it gives me a lot of flexibility. So just bear with me. How many of you guys have taken a database course? Okay, so not too bad, not too bad. Okay, so this does involve a little bit of database theory, okay? And like everything I teach, if you can't really follow it theoretically, follow along with the code, and then, you know, at least you got something working, and then you can research it more outside of class, okay? Or you'll get to that class at that point, okay? What we're gonna do is we are gonna create, for the first time, what's called an active record association, okay? But active record associations are really just kind of clever ways of leveraging database relationships, okay? For those of you who've taken a database course, you probably are used to, you know, foreign keys, primary keys, you know, has many relationships, stuff like that. Like you may have a blog post that has many comments, right? So what you do is you create a blog post table, and then you have comments table. And every record in the comments table will have a reference to some blog post, right? That's probably something you're very, very familiar with, right? So it starts to look something like, here, let me just create a new slide. Or whatever, I'll just do it here. What it starts to look like is, just give me a second here. Okay, so what it starts to look like is you may have, say, like a blog post table here. Okay, and then let's say it has a relationship with comments here, okay? And then what you might do is that comments has a couple of properties, right? It'll have like a, you know, say a body, an author, and then one thing it'll have is a blog post ID, right? That's how we usually reference these things, right? So what happens is that comments belongs to a blog post, okay? So if we were to adopt this kind of model, okay, one thing we need to do is we have to add a blog post ID into our comments, okay? Now, if we want to use this in a convenient way in our Ruby on Rails code, this is where we use active record relationships, okay? Active record relationships are basically leveraging the smarts of the database, but in a code way that's easy to code with, okay? So here's what I mean. So let's say we go to our blog post, or they're not called blog posts, they're called news posts. Okay, we go to our news post model, okay? Let's say in the database, we already have this comments model and it has a news post ID. We can do stuff like this. Has many comments. Okay? And what that does is, as long as you named everything properly, okay? You've named comments, you built it using the Rails generator, so a uppercase comment model, a comments table, and its foreign key is a news post ID, okay? So it matches here, okay? This will be smart enough to look up all the comments that belong to the news post, okay? So what you're able to do is if you ever get a news post, okay? So if you were to get a news post, say something like this, okay, so find the news post, you should be familiar with that now. You can do stuff like this, okay? And what that does is the instant you reference that, is it creates a SQL statement to say, select all the comments from the comments table where the news post ID matches the news post, the ID of this news post here. Okay? So basically, all that has many comments thing does is add the smart method to your class so you can select records from a associated table. Okay, that's what active record relationships are. They're convenience methods that use everything you know about database relationships anyways. Okay, so all you have to do is make sure you add the foreign key relationship, and then you just have to add the active record relationship there. Okay, very similarly, what if you want to go the other way? What if you already have a comment and you want to find out what news post it belongs to? Okay, well, all you'd have to do is go into that comment. Again, we don't actually have a comment class, but it would look like this. So you have a comment class, it would look like this. Belongs to news post. And then if you had a comment, okay, you could do comment.newspost, and it would do the same thing. It would do select star from you know, the news post database, you know, where the ID is equal to the ID, the news post ID that I have. Okay? So again, it's convenience methods that use the database structure. Okay? That was a quick intro to active record relationships, okay? And those are actually two of the most common ones, okay? Has many and belongs to. We're not actually gonna do that here. We are gonna use something called has and belongs to many. This basically sets up a many-to-many relationship, okay? Now, without getting into too much database theory, okay? If you are to set up a many-to-many relationship, you have to have a join table, okay? So what it looks like is this. Too many tools open here. Oh, looks like it's still going. Cross our fingers. Okay, so what was I doing here? Okay. Okay, so what it looks like is if you have a bunch of users, I'll actually use the thing that we're going to here, okay? Okay, so let's say you have a bunch of users. Okay, so let's say they have an email. Okay, so let's say casey.lee@gmail.com. And then Ryan, I'm going to pick on you. Ryan@O'Connor. O'Connor.com. Okay, and then what we're going to link this with is user roles. Okay, we are going to create a table that manages roles. Okay, so we are only going to have one role in this case, but in the future you could have many, right? You could have an admin, you could have, you know, a copy editor who's just going to edit your text. You could have what else? You could have a moderator. Okay, that's a good example. Okay, so you could have those roles, and any one of your users can have one or more of these roles or none of these roles. Okay, now the only way you can manage that is with an intermediary table in the middle. Okay, that links these two together. Okay, because if you were to put something, say, like a user ID here, okay, whoops. Okay, so let's say the two columns are role and user ID. Okay, the problem is you can only link one role to a user, right? So let's say, you know, this is linked to casey.lee@gmail.com. Well, now admin can't belong to any other user, and we don't want that situation. But what if you wanted the other way around, right? Like, if you wanted, say, so this is email and say role ID, okay? If you say put an admin there, right? Then yes, it belongs to admin, but then the question is, how do you add more roles to casey.lee@gmail.com? Right? You only have one column there. Now, there's a lot of fancy things you could do. You could say, have that column be an array of roles, okay? And you can do a lot of work there as well. You could like add a bunch of string delimited roles and stuff like that. There's no problem with that. It's just the route I'm not taking, okay? The route I'm taking is to have this join table in the middle, okay? And the way this looks, again, those of you taking database should be familiar with this. Okay, we're going to create a roles users table. Okay, let's actually name these how Rails names them. Lowercase. And really, it's just going to be a join between the role ID and the user ID. Okay. So let's say these are actually ID columns. So we have 1, 2, and then we have ID 1, 2, 3. Okay. So then all we have to say is, let's say Casey is an administrator and he's a copy editor. Okay. So admin Casey, copy editor Casey. Okay. So every one of those records represents a pairing between a user and a role. Okay. And this is what we're going to implement. Okay. All right. So remember I said with the has been and the belongs to, it all depended on the naming, right? You had to name your foreign key news post ID. You had to name, you know, comments the proper Rails way, so lowercase, plural, table, uppercase, singular, model, things like that. Okay. Has and belongs to many, same kind of deal. You have to follow a lot of like naming conventions, okay, for this to work properly. If you don't follow the naming conventions, it doesn't mean it can't work. It just means you have to do extra configuration. Always the story with Rails. Okay, if you don't follow the naming conventions, you just have to put extra configuration there. So you have to say, what join table do these use? What foreign key do they use? What primary key, and so on and so forth, okay? So we're going to follow the conventions so we have to code a lot less, okay? So what we're going to do is we are going to create that table in the middle, and that table does not have a associated Ruby model, okay? It's just a table in the background to manage this stuff, okay? So what we're going to do is we are going to create a migration from scratch. We've never done this before. We've always created models or scaffolds that create the migrations for us. We are going to create this table, this migration that creates the table ourselves, okay? So we're going to say it's called create roles users table. Okay. So that's just going to create an empty migration for us, but it's going to timestamp it properly for us. That's why we use that. Okay, so we go into our migration. Okay, so it tried to guess what we were trying to do here. So it said create table roles users tables. Pretty close. Okay, we don't want to call it roles users tables. We want to just call it roles users. So I bet you if we were smart enough to do that, Rails generate migration, create roles users, it would have been smart enough. Okay, now the reason I'm naming it this is, again, a Rails convention. The Rails convention is if you're ever doing a has and belongs to many relationship, the join table is basically lowercase plural of the two models you're joining, separated by an underscore, in alphabetical order. Okay? I don't know, these conventions are like how do you remember all these conventions? It's practice. Or the first time someone mentions it to you, you're like, what the F? Like, what the hell, okay, is going on here? Okay, then you'll never forget it, right? Like little conventions, you're like, oh my God, this is like so crazy, right? But then the first time you learn, then you're like, I don't have to code the same. I know exactly how it's going to move on, okay? So create a table called roles users. Okay, it's going to have 2 columns. Okay, it's going to have 2 integer columns, one called the role ID and one called the user ID. Okay, and the other thing that we're going to do is we are not going to let Rails create all the automatic columns that it usually creates. It usually creates what? ID column for us, a created at column, a updated at column. We don't need that for this, okay? Because we're not managing this. This is just a background auxiliary table that's managing a relationship for us, okay? If you, for some reason, need to examine that relationship, yeah, then keep that stuff in, okay? But we don't in this case, okay? So I completely forget how to do that. So let me just quickly look this up. So there's a quick way you can do that. As you can see, I've done this over and over again. Okay, so all you have to do is say ID false, okay? And that'll get rid of the ID column, okay? So where are we here? ID false. Okay, so it's going to create a quick table for us. Let me close this guy. Okay, and now all we have to do is run the migration. Okay, so that'll create the table for us. Now we have this roles users table in the database. Now again, this is the first time we've created a table without an associated model. So we don't have a direct way to access this. We're basically going to rely on all these Rails methods to create the entries for us. Okay, so here's what we're going to do. In our, we don't have a role model. Sorry, that's one thing I forgot to create. So we have our user model, we have the join table, but we don't actually have the other model that it's joining to yet. Okay, so we need to create that as well. Okay, so let's generate that model. So we should be familiar with Rails generate model now. And this is going to be a role. And the role is just going to have a name. Okay, and because it's a string, we don't have to actually specify string here. Again, it's implied. Okay, string is the default. Again, this creates the model class and the migration that we need. Okay, model class, role.rb, and the migration that we need up here. Okay, so let's run rake db migrate on that as well. Okay, so now we have a roles table, we have a news post table, or we have a roles table, a users table, and the join table between them. Okay, so now let's actually create the active record relationship. Okay, so if we go to our user class, okay, you can basically put this anywhere outside of your class, your instance methods or class methods, okay? Because basically anything that is in outside those methods, when you load the class, that stuff runs, right? So we are going to create a has and belongs to many relationship that links to roles. So again, this is just a method that creates a method on your instances. So you can do user.roles that will smartly create the SQL statement to go select star from the roles table using the join table to any relationship that is on the current user ID. Okay. And if you want it the other way around too, okay, if you want to be able to access a role, a user from a role, you can also create the other side of the relationship. Okay, so you can do has and belongs to many users. So let's say you want to find all the admins. Okay, you bring up the admin role and say admin or role.users. Okay. Probably not as useful this case here, but you never know. Okay. And remember, if you don't have these statements in there, it's not like your database doesn't have the mechanism to deal with it. Okay. You could write your own SQL statements that make up these joins. Okay. These are just methods that provide a very convenient way for you to access the associated model. Okay. Now let's fill up our database with some data. So Rails C. Okay, and let's look at our roles. Okay, so if we look at our roles, there should be nothing in there right now. Okay, active record relation returns effectively an empty array. Okay, there's nothing there. So let's just create a role. So we'll say role equals role.create. It takes in a hash. We'll call it admin. This is the same thing as doing role.new with the hash and then doing role.save. Create does it all in one step. Okay? So again, the SQL statement's there. You see it inserted in roles. Now we have this role in our database. Okay? There is a way, by the way, again, just in the interest of time, you can create a data seed file. So let's say, for example, anytime you were to deploy this app, okay, you have this website and you're deploying it on multiple machines or whatever, you always need this admin role in the database. Okay, there's a file called seeds.rb, okay, that allows you to say, it's just a general practice, whenever we deploy this app, make sure we run the seeds file that loads up database with any kind of seed data. Okay, it's not an automatic thing, by the way. It's not something that once you deploy the app, it automatically inserts this data. It's actually a rake task. Okay, like you actually have to type in rake db seed, and then that runs your seeds file. So it's more of a kind of convention that people do versus an automated thing. Okay, but that's where you typically put any seed data that you need. Okay, so our role has been created. Okay, now we can add this role to as many users as we want. Okay, so I'm going to create a couple more users here. So if I go back to my website here, still running, yep, okay. So I'm going to sign up with another user here. So let's use Ryan again. Is that how you spell your name? O-R. O-R. Okay, I'm going to give him a password. Okay, so now we have 2 users in there. Okay, and let's do one more user. Who wants to be a Chris? Oh, and we're not on the sign up page. So we have 3 users in there, 3 test users, okay? And we should be able to see those actually if we look in our Rails console. Yep. So there's user 1, there's user 2, and there's user 3. Okay, so we have 3 users there. And now let's add roles to our users. Let's create these relationships, okay? So pretty easy to do that. Basically, the way you can view this is that has many and has and belongs to many. Anytime you are using an active record relationship that returns a collection of items, or potentially a collection of items, I should say. Okay, so let's say we have our news post and our comments, right? We do newspost.comments, okay? Anything that's being returned, you can basically think of it like an array. So anything you can do with Ruby arrays, you can generally do with active record relationships that potentially return a collection. Doesn't work the other way around, obviously. Like if you have a belongs to can only belong to one thing, right? So in that case, you're just dealing with the record itself, not a collection of records. Okay, but if you're potentially returning a collection of records, you can think of them as an array. So if you add stuff to that array, you can delete stuff from that array, and so on and so forth. And that's how we're going to do it. Okay, so just a quick review on arrays. If you have an array, say an empty array like this, you can push stuff onto that array using the double arrows. Okay, that's how I spell hello when my hands aren't on the right keys. All right, so you can also put some more stuff on there, right? And that's how you add stuff to an array. Similar to these active record collections, okay? So let's try it out. So let's first get the role that we want to add to our user, okay? So I actually already have it in here. See, role. I mean, that's because way up there we created that role. But if you don't have that in local variable, right? You could just do find by and name. Okay. Active records have this find by method. Okay, that takes in a hash of any of the active record properties. Okay. Rails 3.2 and below, they'd actually call this find by name. They'd actually dynamically create all these methods for you. Find by name, find by title, find by body, and so on and so on. Okay. So we found that role. The role is now sitting in our variable called role. Okay. Now let's grab our user. So let's say user find by email. Okay, so we got our user. Again, anytime you're unsure about what you have in your variables, just type a variable and hit enter. Okay. All right. Now remember what I said that has and belongs to many thing does. It creates a method on your instances that you can call that does its smarts to go into the database and find those records. Okay, so if I do u dot roles, okay, because user has now a method called roles. All right. It went into the database, did select role star. You can see even the join that it does, and then it returned an empty active record relation. Again, you can kind of view that as basically an array. Okay. So what I'm getting at is this method here in your user table, user model, it's almost like doing this. Then you do like a select star from da-da-da-da and get the result back and instantiate it into your models and then return that value back up. That's what that method is doing basically. Okay. Okay, so u.roles has nothing in it, but it's just like an array. We can add any role that we want into it, okay? So let's add that, like we have the u variable and we have the role variable. So all I have to do now is do u.roles, that's like the array, okay? And throw on the role into that relationship. Okay. Now the interesting thing about active record relations, like has and belongs to many, is that they actually update the database the instant you affect that relationship. Okay, a lot of times you are doing in-memory stuff and you have to call .save. As you can see, the instant I added it, it inserted a record into roles users, role ID, user ID. Okay, so you don't have to call .save to save that relationship. Now it's already in there. Okay. So that's how you add a role. Okay. Now that is again a little convoluted because if you think about it, the way we did this, okay, is we basically did find a role with the name admin, and then find the user that we want to add it to, and then user.roles add that role. Right? That's pretty, like if we want to, every time we want to switch somebody to that's like 3 steps, like that, again, a little bit verbose. So why don't we just add a method that summarizes that basically? Okay, so why don't we just create a method that does that? So why don't we say add role, okay, and it takes in a role. So we could do self.role. Self is like this, by the way, in other languages, okay? Self.roles, and then we just add that role. But even that doesn't solve our problem either, right? Because that has to take in a role. So we still have to find that role by the name, right? So what I like to do is I like to add another convenience method called add role by name. Okay. And then what we do is we say role equals role.find by name. And then add that. Okay, so now we have a really easy way to add roles, okay? Now, what about testing that role, right? Like is a user and a min? All we have to basically do is find out if that role exists in its collection of roles, right? So I like to create convenience methods for that as well, okay? So we'd say is role. Okay. And a question mark is just like any other character in Ruby when it comes to method definitions and variable definitions. Okay, you can put question marks in. It treats it just like any other character. We typically put question marks on anything that would return a Boolean. Okay, it's just like, again, another convention. Okay, so this is the weird thing about Ruby on Rails, because I kind of use the term convention in two different senses. There are conventions that are followed that don't really have any automated benefit. They're just conventions that people use to name methods and stuff like that. But then there are conventions that if you follow them, they get a whole bunch of automated stuff that comes out of them. Okay, this is one of those cases where it's just a convention that you follow, doesn't really give you anything for free, right? Okay, so all we have to do now is see if the roles includes. Is it includes or I think include role. Okay, so that's like contains in some of the languages. You're basically testing if an array contains a value. Okay, so like, for example, if we have 3, 4, 5, include 3, true. So if you extract that role and see if that role is in your array, then return true, basically. Okay, so we should be able to do that now, actually. So user.roles.include role should be true. Yeah. And again, I like to create that parallel method. So is role by name. Okay, self roles. There, whoop. This is all wrong. Yeah, this is wrong too. Have that replicated. Following the method above it, right? Okay, so now we have ways to easily add roles and ways to easily check if that user is a certain role. Okay. Go back to Rails console. I think if you type reload exclamation mark, that should reload your environment. Okay, in your Rails server, every time you send a request in development mode, it reloads your entire environment, so you don't have to restart the server. Rails console, it's a little different. So if we do user.isRole, so the current role that we have in the variable is that admin role, right? So we could say isRole role. No, it didn't work. Reset the console. Okay, so we'll find the role. And then we'll test if a certain user is that role. Okay, so is role and pass in that role. True, it is an admin. Now again, I've created a helper method to handle this. I didn't have to find that role, right? I could have simply done is role by name. That's an admin. Okay. There are arguments for how you name your methods, obviously. I guarantee you I'm one of the worst variable and method namers in the world. I have like such stupidly long variables, stupidly long method names. Chances are you'd more likely use the string version. So maybe is role should be, the default with a string, and then the other one should be like is role by object or something like that. Yeah. Again, see how bad I am? So again, you can decide how you want to do that. Okay, but now we have an easy way to check that. Okay, so now we can call is role by name admin on the user. Okay, so let's actually use that to our advantage. Okay, so let's start. There's two things that we want to do when it comes to authorization. Okay, one is we want to prevent malicious users from getting access to any of our server-side code. Okay, I'm going to get some class participation here. Somebody who hasn't taken the class before, you three basically. Okay, as someone who hasn't taken the class before, can you quickly tell me what the Rails routing path is when I send a request? What's the first thing it hits if I send a request to a Rails server?
Well, it goes to routes.
Routes, perfect. Okay, and then where does it go after routes?
Controller.
Controller, perfect. Okay, and then what happens inside the controller?
It goes to a specific action.
goes to a specific action, okay? And then what happens in the action?
Well, I don't-
We don't know, right? It could be anything, right? Okay, so if you think about that, okay, what's your name, sorry?
John,
Jonathan? Okay, thanks for speaking up. All right, if you think about that, the routes code is just a router. It directs your control flow to one of the controllers. So your routes file is not gonna have anything that affects data or do anything, right? Then it goes to the controller and a specific action. And then inside the action, you are doing a bunch of stuff, potentially damaging stuff, right? Or potentially stuff that only an admin should see. So if you think about authorization in a Rails app, okay, the place you should protect yourself is at the controller level. As long as you're protected at the controller level, you are safe. Okay, that's your entry point from the outside world into your world. Okay, so as long as you block any malicious users out of the controller, okay, actions, you are safe. So the first thing we do in authorization is we basically prevent any malicious user from getting into a controller action. That's the first thing we do. The second thing we do is more of a user friendliness thing. What we do is we render our views differently depending on what kind of user you are. So if you're an administrator, we'll have the edit and destroy links. But if you're not an administrator, we won't have the edit and destroy links because you can't do it anyways. You might be able to click on them and then it'll hit our server, but our server just says, nope, you can't do that, right? So we could do it that. So there's two things. One is actually protecting your data, which is the more important thing, by the way. And then the second piece is making your views more user-friendly so that people can't click on things that they can't do anyways, okay? So here's what we're gonna do. We are gonna protect our news post controller. This is the only thing that we've coded so far. Well, we did products, but we can protect products after this as well, right? This is the only thing that we coded that we don't want the non-administrators to do anything with, okay? So we're gonna go through this, and then we're gonna refactor it, and then we're gonna refactor it, okay? So the index, okay? The index shows all your news posts, okay? So for the news post, is that something that you want non-administrators to see? Are you okay with non-administrators seeing an index of your news posts or blog posts? Depends on your app, okay? But it would be a pretty useless blog if they couldn't see it, if only administrators could see it. But there are places where that happens, right? You might be in a development mode where you don't want to release any blog posts yet, right? And anybody comes to your site, you just want to hide that, okay? Yes, that's definitely the case, okay? And most blogs that I've seen, you don't actually need to be an administrator to see what's on there, okay? But again, there are like, say, internal blogs, right? Like company blogs, right? You don't want people to see that stuff. That's stuff maybe you only want administrators to see, okay? Our app, we're making a public blog here. So the index and the show, we're not gonna do anything with. But the create, the edit, and the update, and the destroy, we don't want anybody but administrators to deal with that. Okay, so here's how we're gonna do that. Let's start with just new, and then we're gonna use the same model for everything. Okay, so once we enter the new thing, okay, remember we have access to this current user, okay? So what we can do is we can say if current user dot is role by name admin, okay, else end. And what we're gonna do is we are gonna say redirect to group path. Okay, so the very first piece of code that a new request would ever hit would be that, and it says if the current user is an administrator. That is completely wrong, right? That looks a little better. If they are an administrator, go ahead and do what we were doing before. Create a new news post in memory, send it to the form, render the form. If they're not an administrator, redirect them to the root path. Okay? Now, can anybody see an immediate potential problem with this? Specific to object-oriented programming, specifically handling an error. Null pointer. Where would the null pointer be? How do null pointers happen? Does anybody know? That would not be a null pointer, but that would be a problem. Yes, that would be a problem, but it wouldn't be a null pointer. That's good. So that's a potential problem. If there's no current user, exactly. Null pointers happen when you call a method on a null object, right? So the other thing we'd have to do is probably check if a current user exists. So you can luckily do this in shorthand on Rails, and you have that. Okay. So that's how you may handle this. Okay. Now, again, let's see if this actually works. Okay, so if I try to go to /newsposts/new, okay, is roll. That's exactly what I'm getting. Okay. Oh, right. I'm thinking that this is the redirect path. Okay. Okay, and see that redirected me back here. Okay. So that's how you protect that. Now, we want to do this with new, create, edit, and so on and so forth, right? So what we'd probably do is we'd go about this and we would say, okay, you know, if this, okay, else this, and this, redirect to root path, and we do this for everything, so that every one of our methods is protected, okay? Well, first of all, the one thing that's kind of not great about this is that we have code duplication. Second thing that's not so great about this is that we are starting to introduce the idea of authorization into our actions, okay? And if you think about create, okay, if you call create, the idea of doing authentication or authorization should be outside of that method, right? Create is all about creating it. It shouldn't have any notion of who's logged in or whatever, right? That should kind of be outside of it, okay? So luckily, Rails provides us a way to actually attach methods to other methods, okay? And we can say, before this method, run this method, okay? Or after this method, run this method, and so on and so forth, okay? So that's exactly what we're going to use instead of what I'm doing here, okay? So what they're called is they're called before actions and after actions, okay, and things like that, okay? In Rails 3.2 and below, they're called before filters, okay? So what I can do is I can say before action, okay, start the method, okay, and I can say call a method called deny access for non-admins. Okay, I have to program that method. Again, another example of how bad I am at naming methods. Okay, before action, deny access for non-admins. Okay, and if I leave it like that, this runs on every method, before every method. Okay, so if I go to define this method, deny access for non-admins. Okay, I'll make this a private method. I only need it in this class. Okay. But what that's going to do is it's going to run that method before all these methods. Okay. So if I make an index request, it runs that first. If I make a new request, it runs that first. If I make a create request, it runs that first. Okay. So that's how before actions work. Okay. You can get a bit more granular with it though. You can say, okay, run this in before everything except for a couple of these methods, or run this only for a couple of these methods. Okay. So one thing it solves is code duplication, but the other thing it solves is separation of logic. Okay, so you may have a before action on a single method. That seems a little bit weird, right? Because it's only in one place. Why do you need to separate it? But it's more for separation of logic. You want to separate your authorization logic from your actual RESTful resources CRUD actions. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to say run this on everything except index and show. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm basically going to create the opposite of this condition here and say if there isn't a current user or the current user is not an admin, then redirect to the root path. Now, the reason I can do this really easily here and ensure that the rest of the code doesn't run is something I mentioned a couple weeks ago about redirect to, okay? Redirect to is a halting command. Okay, that means, again, it's like a return statement in the middle of a method. Okay, it stops execution. Everything below that won't run. So if I run this before my method, okay, and I'm not an admin, redirect to root path will happen, and none of the rest of the code will happen. Okay, so that protects our app. Okay, so let's get rid of all this then. Now, to be honest, before actions can be a little bit controversial because they do require you look somewhere completely not on your code. Okay, you can be debugging, you're so focused on an action, and you're like, why the hell isn't this happening? And you realize it's because there's a before action way the hell up at the top of your code. Okay, that's why they can be a little bit controversial. Okay, it definitely decreases readability, and even worse is if that is in the superclass or base class, right? If you put this in the application controller, okay, then you're really looking around. And again, big applications have like 5, 10, 15, 30 before actions. And you're doing all this like tweaking. You'll go into a specific controller and you'll be like, skip this before action for this specific case. And it gets really hairy and messy, okay? I'd say for generally small applications, they're very, very handy. And I use them all the time, okay? But when you get to bigger applications, you may run into a developer who's like, I don't use before actions, okay? Rightfully so, they can be big headaches, okay? All right, so there we go. So now everything's protected except for index and show. All right. Okay, let's do a little bit more refactoring. Okay, since our app really is only checking admin and non-admins, doesn't really check anything else. Okay, I'm going to create a little helper, a little method that summarizes this if condition, because this if condition is a little bit long and ugly. Okay, so I'm going to create a view helper. Okay, because in my views, I'm going to say if you're an administrator, you know, show this, and if not, show this or whatever, right? Okay, so that's what I'm going to do. So anytime you want to create your own view helpers, in other words, little methods that you want to use in your views, okay, you put them in this helpers folder. Okay, and this is a general helper. It doesn't apply specifically to news posts or products. So I'm just going to put this in the application helper. Anything you put in the helpers modules will be available across all your views, okay? So you can create like formatters here, you can create anything that like massages your data for view only, okay? So another, I mean, I really wish they would have called helpers view helpers because they're automatically available in views and not anywhere else, okay? So let's call this is admin, and we'll basically grab this here, and we'll just say is admin, is current user, and that. Okay, now we can use that in our views. Okay, so let's do a quick example of that. If we go to the index, okay, so our index is wide open, right? If we go to the news post index here, we have show details, edit post, destroy post. Show details is fine, but we don't want them to be able to edit post or destroy post. They won't have access to it anyways, right? When you hit edit, you see it redirects you back to here. So you don't want to show them that, right? We've already protected the server side of this. Now we just want to protect the views here, okay? So I'll just do this really quickly. I know we're running out of time here. So if we go to our index, okay, so we have all these links here, show details, edit post, destroy post. Okay, around edit post, I'm just going to do is admin. And there we go. Okay. That's the same thing as, again, putting all that code I have here, putting this whole if condition in there, right? Is admin. All right, it's in there. And now they're gone. Okay, so this is sweet. So now if I sign in as an administrator, okay, now that I am an administrator, you see edit post and destroy post are there. Okay, so that's how you protect your app. One last thing before we go, we have code duplication again, right? I put that method into, I put basically that code into this isAdmin. So why, like if I created another method in my controllers, same thing would happen here, right? Would there be an issue there? We'd have code duplication. So after all that spiel about view helpers go into helpers, occasionally you'll have some helpers that you want to use in your controllers as well. This is a perfect example of that, okay? So what I want to do is I just include that helper, okay? So you'll see this is a module called application helper, okay? So I can include the application helper here, okay? And then I should be able to basically change this to isAdmin. Okay. Now again, I'm picturing this isAdmin is going to be used in a lot of places. Yes, question? Good stuff. Okay, and again, this application helper may be used across all controllers. So I may put this include application helper in all the controllers, or regular object-oriented subclassing. I could put that in the top controller, application controller, and it'll be available in all of them. Okay. Okay. Any questions? Cool. All right. So now your app is protected. It still looks ugly. Okay. So at the beginning of next class, we'll clean it up a little bit, and then it's basically shippable. Okay. You could have an app that has no JavaScript in it, and it's perfectly fine. You can do a lot of powerful stuff with Rails without any JavaScript. Okay. So spend the first half of the next class on cleaning this up, making it look nice, and then we'll basically get into JavaScript after that to round off the course. Okay. I'm really hoping we get to Ajax. Ajax is a very powerful concept that'll make your apps very powerful, and then is a natural lead into when you start to learn Backbone, Ember, Angular, all these fancy JavaScript frameworks. Okay? Any questions? Cool. All right, we will see you guys next week.